pay. You can have your IAPs and nobody ever uses it, right? So you need to be, you can have your ads and nobody ever uses it, or nobody ever sees your ad, right? So you got to figure out ways to do that. User retention. I think user retention is the holy grail for gaming.
So, hey, what's up, people? It's Johanna, aka Jojo. I'm super excited today because we have here with us Hugo Obi. So, Hugo is the founder of Maliyo Games, the first indigenous gaming company in Nigeria, and one of the early pioneers, entrepreneur, and of mobile gaming in Sub-Saharan Africa. So Hugo is a visionary entrepreneur with interest in the development of mobile content for Africa's growing mobile consumers. He recently released the mobile game Whot King Card. And so Hugo, I'm going to let you talk in details about your game, and then we are going to jump right into your background because we've got some amazing things going on. Up to you.
Thanks, Jojo. Thanks for having me on the show. It's a real pleasure to be here. So yes, we build mobile games. We build African-inspired mobile games for African-inspired mobile games. Our latest game is a play on the traditional Whot Card game, which is very popular in West Africa, especially in countries like Nigeria, for instance. And we wanted to bring modernize Whot for mobile. So there are a couple of Whot games that are on mobile already. Ours is called Whot King. And what makes our particular version very unique is that we did a lot of visual effects, very cool visual effects and sound effects within the game. We did a complete redesign of the cards themselves. And we enable users to actually earn coins and unlock items within the game. So there is a lot of fun. We introduce a lot of features very common within casual gaming into Whot King. And this is a project that we're still working on. So we're constantly releasing new updates, we're refreshing the content, and we're broadening the scope of the game. We hope that this is going to be a really, really successful title over time. But that's the current project that we're working on right now.
So that's great. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And so what is so you released it, and how is the response for the game?
Oh yeah, so we released the game. We released the very first version in early access. So this is like a public beta back in June last year. And then subsequently in October, we released the public version, the production version. So we went into full release. And obviously we've had over 20,000 installs for the game so far across the different app stores. And we are actually getting very, very, very good positive reviews on the app store, which is really, really, really important, because it's one thing for people to play a game. It's another thing to know how they feel about the game. And so far, the reviews have been really, really encouraging. So that inspires us to continue to develop the game itself.
That's great. So I'll put the link to download the game, and everybody here, you people, you have to download that game, play it, and really test it, and also send a comment, a recommendation. So let's go back into your background. So can you tell me, how did you get into the video games industry?
So my adventure into video gaming was actually accidental. I started off with a background in economics and finance, working as a finance analyst back in London. I then branched into doing recruitment tech, so building a recruitment tech business. That was my first foray into sort of like startup and entrepreneurship, and then doing sort of like research and looking at the market, the future market and where opportunities were within, developing content for mobile, because mobile was an emerging space back in, I guess what you can say, like 2008, 2009, it was really, really still emerging. Yeah. And, I grew up in Nigeria. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. I wanted to move back to Nigeria to, do something significant, or at least like more significant than I was doing back in London. And then through my research, I identified the gaming space as a niche segment that is untapped. right? And the research data around gaming demonstrates that the market size of gaming is actually much bigger than the size of music and movies combined, right? And it's not something that people really pay attention to. And yeah, so once I determined that, we started to do some explorations. We did some early prototypes. So we built some early prototypes back in 2012. We did a game called Okada Rider and another game called Mosquito Smasher. And these two games were really, really, really popular. It had really good adoption. There's a lot of really positive feedback. And this was kind of the birth of Maliyo Games, back in 2012. And then, we sort of gradually evolved the company since then to where we are now.
Okay, that's great. So, so how are you doing? What are the challenges? What are your success since you've been into the video gaming industry?
Well, I could tell you, we start with the success. Success is kind of very fluid. We are still work in progress. So, there are different sort of I guess you can call them mini successes. So just releasing titles, the initial titles that we did and the initial feedback that we got around it, releasing a title like Whot King, which is getting really, really strong positive reviews. We have been featured by the Apple App Store twice in 2020. And we have a very good relationship with the app stores. We are hoping, obviously, one of the measures of success is adoption, right? So our target for this year is to get at least to 100,000 installs across the board. We are sort of not too far away from doing that. I think we can actually do that prior, before the end of the year. But our long-term goal is to kind of hit that 1 million mark, which I think is a significant sort of milestone for games coming from the continent. So that I think is, when I can hopefully, maybe relax a little bit and feel yes, we're actually doing something huge. But up until then, it's all of these kind of mini successes, we're doing some content licensing, for instance, to third parties. We do collaborations. We work with we do, events around gaming as well locally here in Nigeria. So and all of those things obviously, they are mini success events. We get very good, very good user engagement, and we get very good feedback. But again, these are continuous things, and we're going to be building up on them over time. In terms of the challenges, I mean, I would say these are challenges that cut across the board for anybody who is doing gaming. But specifically for us doing gaming in Africa, I think the biggest challenge is on the talent side, I would say. It's finding the right talent. And then there is also the affordability, right? So finding the relevant talent and then obviously being able to build a team that is dedicated purely to video gaming, right? You provide them with the right incentives to focus and to produce the best user experience possible. I think we can accomplish this. I think these are things that are achievable. But at the same time, I think this is something that, so one of the things that we did when we started off 2020, before everything sort of shifted, one of the things that we went into 2020 thinking about was to change our focus from a short-term, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months focus to start looking at our progression over a longer period of time. So looking at a 10-year window, right? So yes, we might want to do 100,000 installs this year, but over a 10-year period of time, we might be looking at 5 to 10 million installs, right? So it might not seem like huge accomplishments to do 100,000 installs, but if you look at it over a longer period of time, then, those numbers will be much bigger, right? So, it's a combination of, it's the small things that you do that enable you to achieve the bigger things, right? But, we now start changing the way that we look at that big accomplishment so that the 100,000 focus for 2021 doesn't seem like we're not ambitious, right? It's because we're looking at a much larger window, right? So that incremental progress in itself, right, then starts to have some form of meaning to us and hopefully to our community.
Yeah. So thank you, Hugo. That's really, really insightful information. So it's a good segue for my next question, which is, what is the most needed for the African gaming industry to grow exponentially?
Okay, so that question, I mean, like, I think different people would answer that question differently. You know, I think that there has to be like less distraction. So you know, if the people who are in gaming need to focus on gaming, right? There is also always the temptation of sort of like doing one thing and then doing something else and then doing something else and then doing something else, right? But if you focus on the one thing itself, right, then you can continue to build up on it, right? So I think like, you know, I think that is the one thing I would say that is needed, right? And then how do you get that? You know, how do you concentrate or sort of like shift your focus just to gaming, right? Firstly is that obviously you need to have some revenue stream, right? You need to be able to have some form of income to be able to support yourself and your team, you know, even if that income isn't that great, right? It could be, you know, very little income, but at least like sufficient enough to sustain you guys up until your game becomes a success, right? And then the other thing is obviously the IP itself, you know, like the product that you guys are working on has to be something that, you know, like you can continue to build up, right? So one of the things that I learned last year, you know, like we really went on a learning expedition in 2020, right? Really trying to figure out, you know, what are the biggest titles, what are the most successful gaming companies, what are they doing differently, right? And it's really investing in single IPs, right? You know, like having a group of people who are dedicated to supporting the IP, refreshing the content, you know, adding fresh features or new features or, you know, like new items, right, to the game so that the user never gets tired, never gets bored. You know, the content itself is never stale, right? There is also a lot of work around sort of like, you know, like ensuring that, you know, like understanding data around the game in itself, right? So it's really about building your knowledge, right? Like obviously these are all the investments and all the concentration, but really focusing on that one thing, right? Rather than, you know, do this, come back, do that, come back, do, you know, like, yeah. So I mean, like, personally, I think is that I think it's kind of like concentrating, right? Concentrating. And yes, there's a funding component that goes into that. There's a content component that goes into that. There is a skill and knowledge component that goes into that. So, you know, sort of like understanding what it is that is happening in your game or getting user feedback and applying that and figuring out sort of like how to build a longer term, like, you know, content runway for your game, right? So I personally think that is the big challenge, right? If we have 4 or 5, maybe 10 gaming companies in the continent that are dedicated purely to gaming, right? That, you know, month in, month out, they can say this is what we're doing for our IPs. You know, year in, year out, they can say that these are the IPs that we've released and we're supporting, right? And they're hiring people dedicated to that. Then gradually you will start to see the market grow. It's distractions that does not allow us to grow because there are quite a variety of like skill sets required to create a game, and not all of those skill sets are easily accessible, right? And a lot of them are inexperienced. So even if they are accessible, they don't have the experience. You know, if you're working with like a graphic designer or you're working with like an artist, you know, they don't bring in the sort of like value required to improve your games. You know, like if we are, say, for instance, we want to build out like a portfolio of collectibles, right? You know, obviously these are collectibles that an artist would have to create, right? But can we trust to say to that artist, come up with ideas, right? That our users would love, right? You know, we're not there yet. You know, they can create the artwork if you tell them what to create, but they by themselves do not have the experience to go out there and generate this novel ideas that would really fundamentally change how users engage with the games that we build.
Okay, yes, that's all right. There is a lot to take on here, and I hope that our viewers will comment here and to provide either to provide some more information or to have some more question. Hugo's social media will be readily available in the description as well. So let's go to our next questions, which is. You have both known the Western world, so let's say Europe and Europe gaming industry and the African gaming industry. And what are the differences the three most valuable differences that to take away, and what can really actually, what is the gap to fill for that? I think it is going back to the growth of the African gaming industry, but yeah.
Yeah. So again, this is my own personal view, and this can vary with your audience or some other people who are in gaming in the continent. So I think the three distinct ones would be access to funding, infrastructure. So I mean internet power and some kind of office space or something like that. And then the last one is talent, right? So access to funding, a lot of gaming is about experimentation, right? You build, you work internally with a concept. As I said, when we were working on Whot King, we did a public beta release. We got a bit of feedback from the users pretty early on, and that gave us the confidence to then say, okay, fine, let's build out, let's continue to invest and build out this game and release a production version, right? That time that it took us, between June when we did the first release, obviously we've been working on the game since December 2019, and then we released the beta version in June 2020, sorry. So that's about 7 months of work. And then, we then took another 3 months of work or 4 months of work to then release the production version in October. So Europe, most countries have some kind of creative grant that people can apply for. You pitch in an idea with some kind of basic prototype. You apply, you get some access to funding to allow you to actually build out the content, right? Because sometimes we might have the technical competence, but we don't have the artistic competence. We don't have the design competence. We don't have the or even sometimes the creative ability, right? So we need to go out there and hire people to kind of join the team, right? Freelancers to help out with certain components to enable us to release the product to market, right? And then when it gets to market, again, the product can have positive feedback, which might, then might qualify for even more grant funding to then build user adoption. Because, it's one thing building a game, it's another thing acquiring a user, right? And there is a preconception that, if you build a fantastic game, people are going to come because you have a large population. That is not true, right? It's a question of how big is your megaphone, right? And if you're speaking with a, a microphone and a tiny little, megaphone, the only people that can hear you are people within your vicinity, right? You're not really reaching everyone, right? And for you to reach everyone, if you want to reach everyone, then you have to use multiple mediums, right? Radio, television, newspapers, obviously the internet, right? Billboards, if you really want to reach everyone. And obviously if you're doing that, that means you have a lot of resources, right?
Yeah.
So that's the grant side. The infrastructure side is obviously something that is taken for granted in the West, but here it's actually very real, right? So, having 24-hour power access, right? Irrespective of how efficient you are with the use of your power. So in London, you buy power using a meter, and then you regulate the usage of it. You consume it based on you and your household. But at least there is 24-hour power supply, right? Here is the contrary, right? The power is very unpredictable, is very unreliable, and it's not so much of a. And obviously, if you then want to use a generator and use buy petrol or buy diesel for your generator, that the cost can go up significantly, right?
Yeah.
The setup costs quite high. You have the same thing with internet, right? So your basic internet, your basic home internet is sufficient enough for any individual to build that content, download software, do software updates, share files, run software programs that require the internet to run very well. Here, there is a calculation around, what is the data bundle, how much is it going to cost, and can I use it to do X, Y, Z, right? Let's not even talk about the speed, right? So that is something that, you can easily take for granted. If you go to a public library, you can have free internet, you have free power, even in train stations, you have free internet. Even on trains, you have free internet, right?
Yeah.
So it's literally accessible everywhere. And here it is, it's
a struggle.
Of that, right? You've been here, you know what I'm talking about.
Definitely.
And anybody who has been to Africa knows what I'm talking about. And then the last one is talent, right? It's interesting because the pandemic has made the world a little bit more global. So it's actually a lot more easy now to hire talent, to access talent, to bring talent into your team and to be distributed, right? So, I'm looking forward to the time when we can be in a position where we're working with designers and developers and artists from different parts of the continent, right? In the past, that was something that, people would say, oh, do I have to move to Lagos? Can I work from here? And everyone's like, no, we want everybody to be in the same space, right?
Yeah.
But the pandemic has demonstrated to us that actually we can all be very efficient in our own tiny little corners, wherever we are in the world, as long as, again, we have a computer, we have an internet connection. It doesn't matter where you are, right? You deliver your work, you share your work, we work collaboratively using online tools, right?
Yeah.
So that is something that I think actually the pandemic has been an advantage to Africans and Africa because now, we do not have to, we've shifted that mindset of the talent has to be here.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't, because even if I'm working with my colleague who lives maybe in a different community here in Lagos, it makes no difference. He could be also in Kinshasa or in Nairobi or in, wherever else, right? It doesn't make any difference. When we meet online. When we talk, when we work online. So he doesn't have to be in Lagos with me anymore. He could also be in a different state in Nigeria. He doesn't have to be, you see what I mean? So I think that has been an advantage, and it's something that I'm hoping that we can tap into, so that when we're looking to hire people, we can at least we can expand that a little bit more. So maybe on the talent side, in the past it would have been a significant difference because talent is sometimes restricted to geography, but now I think that is no longer the case.
That's great. That's a great response because you actually replying to one of to the following question. So I will jump right into the last question for you today, which is, can you give us any word of advice for anyone looking to be part of the gaming industry today?
So the advice that I would give to anybody who wants to is, it's a continuous learning process, right? The gaming industry might be huge from an economic standpoint, but also at the same time, it's also significantly skewed towards, big studios, Western studios. It's like that, 80%, 80-20% rule. That 20% of the gaming studios, in this case, probably command like 99% of the revenues, right? And then the other 80% are struggling for the 1%, right? So, it's a very tough. It's tough in a different way, right? You have to learn, right? There are a couple of things that we are doing now that we never did before, right? So, optimizing revenue, right? You have to figure out every single avenue to optimize revenue, and you have to look at this from a long-term standpoint, not a short-term standpoint, right? So whatever strategy you have in mind and you say, oh, we're going to do IAPs, or, oh, we're going to do like ads, like literally be prepared to continue to change it till infinity, right? Because, it's not like, oh, we've got IAPs and then people are going to pay. You can have your IAPs and nobody ever uses it, right? So you need to be, you can have your ads and nobody ever uses it, or nobody ever sees your ads, right? So you got to figure out ways to do that. User retention. I think user retention is the holy grail for gaming, right? It doesn't matter how many users you have. It doesn't matter how much revenue you make from those users if you are not able to retain them.
Exactly.
Right? Like literally every single day we are here, we're thinking about how do we improve our user retention numbers. Like that metric is the most important metric to me. I never thought that it would be the most important. I never knew what it meant. But like literally, and it's a rabbit hole, right? There are so many ways to look at it, and there are so many like intricacies that are involved around that. And then the other thing that I think, like you have to be prepared to do is to figure out how to use paid user acquisition. You have to be really, really smart around paid user acquisition, right? A mistake that we made in the past was to assume that we could go organic. We can get virality, we can get influencers or celebrities to like, talk about our game. We can use social media, we can use, like press releases. We assume that will deliver the installs. They do not deliver the installs, right? So literally, you have to sustain your user acquisition numbers over an extended period of time. You have to figure out a way to, like turbo boost, right? Turbo boost your user acquisition, and that is just paid user acquisition. So figure out, like what CPI numbers you can work with, how much you're going to invest. Like I would literally say, don't invest any money in like marketing. Take all of that money you spend on marketing and just pour it into paid user acquisition, right?
Okay.
Because that is what matters the most. You need to get users to understand your retention numbers. When you make changes, you need to get users to see if those changes are improving your retention numbers. You have to get users to see what your revenue looks like, so you can tweak your revenue, your monetization mechanism. So that's the way that I look at it.
Yeah.
So these are the things that if somebody had told me before I went into gaming, because like my assumption was always like it's all about the content. It's all about having like the high quality content. Yes, that is important, but even more important is the data around your games, right?
Yeah.
So we use a tool called Game Analytics, which is actually a very, very, very good tool. I mean, in the past, we use a multitude of tools for analytics, right? So that's to tell you how much we pay attention, right, to data. We use 5 analytics tools in our game. Game Analytics, Facebook Analytics, Google Analytics, AppFlyer, and then your standard Unity Analytics, right, in one game. And literally, my dashboard, I move from one to one, looking at the different metrics to understand how can we improve, and the improvements we're making, is it affecting our numbers, right? So that is part of my job, and these are the things that I said, I didn't know back then. I'm glad that I know them now, and it doesn't end, right? So we keep learning every single day, right? We keep learning every single day. So, never think that your job is done.
Yeah. So that's huge learning, even from me. That's really gems, what you just said, Hugo, about user acquisition and really focusing on that, actually, and not put the social in front of that. Of course, I'm sure the combination of everything would be best, but yes, focusing on the paid acquisition, it's great. So, well, we are at the end of our podcast today. It was really a pleasure to talk to you as usual, Hugo, and I'm going to have all your social media, everything, the link for Whot King Game, and as well, if you want to leave your an email address for contact for people to contact you, that would be great. So viewers, thank you for attending and watching this video. Thank you very much again. This is Johanna Riquier, and I'll see you soon. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share as well to everybody. Thank you very much for that. Bye.